August 7, 1942, at 02:14, the first wave of U.S. Marines stepped off the landing craft and onto a narrow strip of beach that would become forever fixed in history, on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. They carried the era's usual weapons: M1 Garand rifles, Browning automatic rifles, and Thompson submachine guns. But among those familiar arms was something that proved especially devastating to the Japanese defenders: the Winchester Model 12 shotgun. Originally designed for hunting, the pump-action Model 12 was adapted for combat and quickly became one of the most lethal close-quarters weapons in the Pacific jungle. Japanese troops on Guadalcanal were trained and prepared for rifle combat at range, for bayonet charges, and face-to-face fighting. They were not ready for the brutal reality of American shotguns, weapons that could fire as fast as a man could pump the action. A Model 12 loaded with double buckshot contained 9.33 caliber pellets per shell. A trained Marine could fire 6 rounds in about 3 seconds, sending 54 projectiles into an area in the time it took a Japanese soldier to cycle a bolt-action Arisaka. In a jungle, in a cave, or under the cover of night, that kind of close-range firepower was devastating. The Japanese defenders at Guadalcanal, 2,200 strong in the initial actions, had never expected weapons like this. So lethal was the shotgun that Germany had tried to ban similar weapons after World War I in 1918. German diplomats protested that shotguns violated the Hague Conventions because they caused unnecessary suffering. They even threatened to execute any American soldier who used a shotgun. The U.S. rejected the protest and warned that any punishment would be met in kind. No American was executed, and the shotgun stayed in service. By World War II, the Model 12 had been modified for combat use. It had a short 20-inch barrel, a heat shield, a bayonet lug, and most importantly, retained the ability to be fired rapidly. The combat version let a Marine hold the trigger and pump the action as quickly as his arms could work, producing a nearly continuous roar of shells. For soldiers who relied on night attacks, infiltration, and close-in bayonet fighting, the shotgun was a nightmare. Japanese doctrine emphasized night infiltration, sudden charges, and spiritual courage that would prevail against Western firepower. Early Japanese successes in China, Singapore, and the Philippines reinforced that belief, but Guadalcanal shattered it. A dramatic test came just 2 weeks after the landings. On August 21, 1942, at the Battle of the Tenaru, Colonel Ikiki Kono led nearly 1,000 Japanese troops in a night assault across a sandbar intended to smash the Marine perimeter. This was the kind of close fighting the Japanese doctrine celebrated, but waiting for them were machine guns, artillery, and Marines hidden in the shadows armed with rifles and shotguns. As the Japanese advanced, they ran into a storm of fire. Marines used grenades and bar defenses, but in the brutal hand-to-hand fighting along the riverbank, the Winchester Model 12 proved particularly deadly. At 20 yards or less, a single shotgun blast could shred several attackers at once. The Marines turned the shotguns into a rapid-fire cannon. By dawn, the sandbar was littered with bodies. Of the 916 Japanese troops who began the attack, roughly 800 were killed. The shotgun's power lay not only in its lethality but in its psychological effect. In the darkness of the jungle, the sound of a pump-action cycling was terrifying, a sharp metallic clap that made infiltrators' spines shiver. Marines used the weapon in ways rifles could not match. On night patrols, the shotgun was the point man's tool, the first sign of an attack, and an immediate, devastating response. In a defensive position, Marines loaded their shotguns and waited in the dark. When a Japanese raider crept forward with bayonet and grenade, a single blast of buckshot ended the assault. As the war moved into 1943 and 1944, the shotgun proved itself again and again. In New Georgia's jungle, the Model 12 was issued to point men to counter sudden close attacks, One blast could break a Japanese patrol before it ever reached firing range. At night, shotgun-armed Marines occupied overlapping fields of fire that made infiltration a suicide mission. The weapon became a tool for shooting down trails and through foliage where enemies might hide. The buckshot tore leaves apart and struck hidden targets. Perhaps the shotgun's most brutal role came in cave and bunker fighting. Beginning at Tarawa in November 1943 and reaching savage extremes on Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the Japanese turned entire islands into stone, coral, and concrete fortresses. Marines had to crawl into cave mouths, squeeze through tunnels, and fight enemies hunkered in the dark. There, the shotgun was unmatched. Marines developed techniques to fire at cave walls so buckshot would ricochet and spray the interior, turning confined spaces into lethal maelstroms. Survivors described the sound as horrifying, ricocheting pellets screaming from every direction, creating the feeling that death came from all sides. That psychological terror often forced Japanese defenders to abandon positions. On Saipan in July 1944, during one of the largest Japanese banzai charges of the war, thousands of Japanese soldiers threw themselves at American lines. While machine guns and artillery did most of the killing in broken close combat, it was shotgun-armed Marines who helped hold the line at desperate moments. The clouds of lead that shotguns could spread made the difference in where attackers briefly penetrated the defenses. In the island fights, the shotgun joined other close combat tactics. Flamethrowers and smoke would flush and seal tunnels. Shotguns would follow to deliver the killing blow into enclosed spaces. Marines even developed skip shooting, angling shots off tunnel walls to hit enemies hiding around corners. Despite its effectiveness, the Model 12 was never produced in huge numbers. Only about 61,000 were made during the war, a modest figure compared with the millions of rifles manufactured. The shotguns were allocated to units that needed them most: Marine rifle companies, Army assault teams, Navy landing parties, and even airfield security groups. But there was no shortage of ammunition. Millions of shells were manufactured, including standard buckshot, long-range slugs, and birdshot for clearing vegetation. For the Marines who carried them, the Model 12 was a beloved weapon. Some preferred rifles, but many swore by the shotgun's dominance in close combat. Veterans remembered the confidence it gave them at night, knowing that if the Japanese closed in, they had a final, terrible weapon waiting. The Japanese, for their part, never found an effective counter. They tried crude wooden or bamboo body armor, but it was heavy, clumsy, and essentially useless. Their only real defense was to try to avoid getting that close. Yet their whole doctrine depended on close assault. The story of the Model 12 is not just about hardware. It reflects America's approach to war: practical, adaptable, and willing to use whatever worked. Where other armies clung to tradition, Marines embraced innovation. They didn't wait for top-down doctrine. They tested things in the field, learned what worked, and adopted it. Techniques like skip shooting, mixed ammunition loads, and shotgun assault teams weren't invented in labs. They were born in the jungle and caves by Marines trying to survive. By the end of the war, the shotgun had earned a fearsome reputation. It was never the primary weapon of the conflict, but in the brutal, specific environments of the Pacific, it proved indispensable. In night fights, jungle patrols, bunker assaults, and desperate last stands, the Winchester Model 12 gave Marines and soldiers a weapon that shattered Japanese tactical assumptions. Its legacy survived the war. Model 12 served again in Korea, where they proved their worth in night fighting, and shotguns would later be issued in Vietnam for jungle patrols and tunnel clearing. Echoes of World War II's cave-clearing operations. Its influence also reaches into modern military doctrine and weapons. The philosophy of overwhelming close-range firepower survives in systems like the A-10 Warthog's cannon and the AC-130's gunships. For the Japanese soldiers who met it, the Model 12 was more than a gun. It was a terrifying challenge to everything they believed. They had expected Western troops to fail in close combat. Instead, they were shredded in the dark by buckshot. The simple, devastating shotgun proved that American forces could adapt quickly, innovate effectively, and bring overwhelming firepower to any range. From Guadalcanal to Okinawa, the shotgun left its mark on the Pacific War, a small, brutal weapon that helped change tactics and saved lives in the places where close fighting decided the day.